The gym smelled of cheap punch and floor wax, the kind baked into the walls after decades of school assemblies. I'd been half listening to the principal's nasal voice as she rattled off the list of scholarship recipients, sipping from a paper cup, when I heard a name that made my stomach drop. And this year's Special Achievement Award, with a scholarship gift from the Peterson Family Fund. Her pause was for applause, but my ears were buzzing. The name she said next wasn't mine. It was Emily Carter, my ex-stepfather's new stepdaughter. I scanned the crowd instinctively. There he was, 3 rows up from the front, leaning back with that self-satisfied half grin, one arm slung over the back of Emily's chair. She was beaming, holding a giant novelty check. The thing made me flinch. $24,000, the exact total my college fund was supposed to hold, down to the dollar. The same figure he used to crow about, saying I'd never need a loan as long as I stayed on track. I'd never connected my fund to some public prize. That money was in a custodial account under his name. It had been locked away for me since Mom and I first moved in with him. Tax reasons, he claimed, better interest rates. I'd trusted that. But now, here it was, smiling from the stage in Emily's hands, while people clapped and phones flashed for photos. My hand gripped the edge of the folding chair until my knuckles ached. When the applause died, and people shifted to murmur about bake sales and silent auctions, I couldn't stop staring at him. He never looked my way once. But I saw his lips move when Emily leaned in. Something like, "See? Worth it." My heart was pounding so loud that the next announcement was only static in my head. I knew my life had just swerved into something ugly. And that scholarship check was the knife in the steering wheel. The thought boiled inside me. Was my college fund already gone? Or was this some elaborate stunt to put me in my place? I didn't know the answer, but I knew I had to find out. Shall I write the next chapter? When I finally made it out of the gym that night, the cold air slapped my face sharper than I expected. My mom caught up to me outside the double doors, but she looked worn out, her hair frizzing in the damp. "Honey, don't make a scene," she murmured before I even opened my mouth. And that told me everything. She'd either known or suspected, and just let it happen. You have to understand why this isn't something I can brush off. My whole college plan rested on that money. I hadn't applied for loans yet because we always agreed, always, that the college fund would be used first. That account was set up years ago when Mom was still married to him, in his name as the custodian, so I couldn't touch it without him. He claimed it was to protect it from being mismanaged. At 15, I was too naive to hear the alarm bells in that. After their divorce, the custody agreement didn't include him. I was 16 anyway. But the account stayed under his control. When I asked about it 2 years ago, he brushed it off as safe and growing. Anytime money came up, he talked like it was locked in a vault. I think I believed that image so stubbornly that I never imagined it could be used for anything but my tuition. Now, I see the trap. He wasn't tied to me legally anymore, but the college fund gave him this quiet, leverage-laced tether. And lately, he'd been tugging on it in small ways. Delays in covering my SAT fees, forgetting to reimburse me for application submissions, making casual digs at my choice of school. None of it seemed lethal on its own, but together it was a slow erosion. Standing outside that school building, watching him walk Emily to her mother's car in the glow of the street lamps, I realized he'd found a way to make that erosion visible, and very, very public. I needed answers, but I also knew asking him outright would just get me another dismissive smirk. So the question wasn't if I'd confront him. It was how to do it without letting him wriggle out again. Shall I write the next chapter? The first signs had been so small they almost slid past me. A payment delay here, a shrug there. Back in November, I'd reminded him that one of my target universities required an early application fee. It was only $85. He'd said, "No rush, you're probably not going there anyway," and changed the subject to his latest vacation plans. I ended up scrambling to cover it myself from the tips I made at the coffee shop. At the time, I told myself he probably just forgot, maybe got busy. Then, in January, the school sent me a reminder for the deposit on a dual credit course I needed. He claimed he'd already mailed the check. 2 weeks later, the course coordinator told me politely that no such payment had arrived. When I called him, he laughed. "Bureaucracy, kiddo. They lose stuff all the time." I remember holding the phone far from my ear, staring at the wall, wondering why my stomach felt so heavy. There were also the little comments, almost casual, that hinted he didn't much care where I went. Why not take a year off to work? Get some real-world sense before you waste all that money on risky degrees. Or, "You sure you're cut out for competitive schools? Not everyone needs that pressure." Always served with a half smile that made it sound like fatherly guidance. But underneath it, I could hear it. Sabotage dressed as concern. I ignored it because I wanted the easier version of reality, the one where people kept their promises. But seeing Emily walk across that stage with my number, printed across that ridiculous cardboard prop, it yanked every smirk, every delay, every coincidence into a single glaring picture. If he'd been setting this up for months, what else had he already done behind the scenes? That was the question I took to bed with me that night, and the one that jolted me awake before sunrise, pulse racing, because the answer could mean the difference between starting college this fall, or not at all. Shall I write the next chapter? By the time the sun came up, my anger had fermented into something sharper. Suspicion. Every delay, every accidental mishap, suddenly looked like part of a plan. I decided to call him before school, my voice still husky from sleep, thinking maybe I'd catch him off guard. He answered on the second ring, breezy as ever. "Morning, kiddo. What's up?" I skipped the pleasantries. "I need to know if my college fund is intact." There was a beat of silence, then a short chuckle. "You're paranoid. Honestly, you don't understand how bursars and scholarships work. Money moves around in these processes. It's complicated." "It's not complicated," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's supposed to be mine." He sighed, the sound heavy with mock patience. "Listen, you're young, emotional. I think you've been hanging around people who get your head spinning. There's no problem if you're reasonable about your choices. Maybe community college first, ease into it, and then—" "That's not the agreement," I cut in. His tone hardened instantly. "Agreements change. Be smart or you'll end up with nothing." And then, almost casually, "You might want to stop making me out as some villain to the family. It's not a good look. People talk." After he hung up, I just sat there, the dial tone humming in my ear. He'd flipped it so fast, from warm to cold, from dodging to threatening subtly, as if I was the problem for questioning him. The worst part was, I could already hear how he'd spin this to other relatives. I was being ungrateful, dramatic, maybe even unstable. It shouldn't have rattled me, but it did. If no one believed me, he could rewrite the story however he wanted. And judging by the way people had clapped for him last night, I knew I was already losing the perception game. I had to find a way to make others see what he was doing, and I needed something they couldn't dismiss as my paranoia. Shall I write the next chapter? It happened faster than I expected. A week later, the PTA hosted their spring fundraiser in the cafeteria. Plastic tablecloths, raffle baskets, and that smell of powdered cheese from the nachos stand. I had been working the ticket table with 2 other seniors when the microphone crackled, and Mrs. Dalton, the PTA chair, called him up to the front. And there it was. The line you can't uncross. He stood next to Emily, arm tight around her shoulder, as they unveiled a second display check. this one indirectly referencing continuing education for top potential students. The crowd whooped and clapped, flashes popping. He leaned into the mic and said loudly, "We believe in investing where it will make the greatest impact." My stomach turned because his eyes flicked over the audience just long enough to pass me and not linger. It was theatrical. He'd converted our private financial agreement into his public generosity. Only the beneficiary had changed. And because it was done in front of the community, the applause sealed it as truth in people's minds. I heard two parents behind me murmur, "So generous. She's so lucky to have him." Emily smiled shyly under the gym's slam-bright lights, but I noticed she clutched that display check with a familiarity that told me this wasn't new news to her, which meant she'd known, at least for weeks, that this money was hers now. Something inside me shifted in that moment. Up until then, I'd been clinging to the idea that maybe I'd misunderstood, that there was some clerical error or unseen rule. But watching him bask in that applause like a benevolent patriarch made it crystal clear. This wasn't an accident. It was a performance. The theft was the point, and the public nature made it harder for me to fight back without being painted as bitter or unable to be happy for others. Still, if he wanted this public, maybe public was exactly where I needed to fight him. Shall I write the next chapter? The next morning, I tried my first move, the one I thought would be the most rational, least explosive. I went to my mom. She was in the kitchen, shuffling through the mail in her robe, coffee steaming in her favorite chipped mug. "I need you to talk to him," I said without preamble. She froze for a second, scanning my face, then put the mail down slowly. "Talk to him about what?" Her tone was light, but her eyes were already guarded. "You know what? The college fund. He's giving it to Emily." She sighed, sat down at the table, and wrapped both hands around the mug. "Honey, I really don't want to get in the middle. It's messy, and technically it's in his custodial account." "Mom," my voice cracked, partly with frustration, partly from the pressure in my chest. "That money was for my tuition. You told me it was safe." "I thought it was," she said, looking down at the steam rising between her fingers. "But since the divorce, things changed. I'm not listed anywhere on it. Legally, She stopped herself, switching gears. "Maybe you can explore scholarships, or—" "I had a scholarship," I cut in. "It was called my college fund." Her face pinched. "I can't fight him. I can barely get him to answer my calls about alimony. You have to be realistic about what's possible." I wanted to shake her, to make her see that possible shouldn't mean letting him reshape my future out of spite or favoritism. But, instead, I left her there with her coffee, and the bills spread out like casualties. That's when I decided to go to my high school counselor for advice. Mrs. Klein listened intently, nodding in that patient, measured way of hers. She suggested I request a written confirmation of my fund's balance and terms, something official he'd have to respond to. "If he refuses, that's a red flag you can document," she said. So I emailed him that afternoon, careful and polite. "Could you please send me a statement of my college fund showing the current balance and withdrawals? I need it for my financial aid package." His reply came the next day. "Situations have changed. Focus on options in your budget. Balance discussions are premature." Not a number in sight. If there was any doubt left, it was gone. The proof was hiding somewhere, and now I was determined to find it. Shall I write the next chapter? I didn't expect the proof to come from sheer accident. It was 2 weeks later, at my aunt's house, during one of those low-key Sunday lunches where everyone mills around picking at leftovers and gossip. She'd left her iPad on the kitchen counter, screen lit up from a half-completed grocery list. I was scrolling through recipes when a notification pinged. An email. The sender's name made my chest tighten. Peterson Investment Services. The subject line read, "Transfer Confirmation." I didn't mean to open it, or at least that's what I told myself, but my finger tapped before I could think twice. And there it was, in black and white. A transfer for $24,000 from educational custodial account, beneficiary my name, into Carter Family Scholarship Fund. The date was last month, 2 weeks before that award night circus at the school. In the memo line, reassignment approved by custodian. The custodian, of course, was him. For a moment I just stood there, my pulse so loud it drowned out the chatter from the living room. This wasn't rumor or paranoia or interpretation. This was a transactional fact, a paper trail that led straight from my future into Emily's pocket. I took a quick photo of the screen with my phone, my hands trembling so much I almost dropped it. When I set the iPad back down, I felt like the room had tilted. My aunt bustled in then, asking about dessert, oblivious. She had no idea that in that 3-minute window, my entire leverage in this fight had changed. I left lunch early with some excuse about homework, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Now I had what I needed, but the question loomed. How do you use proof against someone who's already shaped the narrative in their favor? That's when the idea started forming, half born out of anger and half from desperation. If he wanted to play this in public, then public is where I'd corner him, where the proof would land, where everyone could see it. Shall I write the next chapter? Once the idea lodged in my head, it wouldn't leave. I replayed all the conversations, all the eyes that had looked past me at PTA nights, the parents who called him generous and saw me as bitter when I didn't clap along. If I confronted him one-on-one, he'd twist it again, maybe even claim I fabricated the email. But in front of witnesses, he wouldn't get to narrate over me in real time. The next PTA meeting was only days away. I pictured it. The long tables, the coffee urn steaming in the corner, parents clustered with notepads and polite nods. I could stand up during financial transparency reports, drop my evidence, and watch the room calculate what they'd seen on that iPad. More importantly, I'd see his face in the instant before he could mask it. Still, the thought made my pulse hammer. This wasn't just some spat. He had standing in the community, a visible role. If I went loud, there'd be no taking it back. So I decided to prepare like it was a debate. I printed the screenshot, noted the email sender, date, and transaction ID. I also prepped a simple statement that I was the listed beneficiary of that account, and the transfer had been made without my knowledge or consent. The risk was clear. If he got angry, he could dig in, freeze whatever scraps were left, make things even harder for me financially in the short term. But the alternative was to watch him waltz away with not just my money, but my dignity, rewriting the story so thoroughly I'd start doubting my own memory. By the night of the meeting, my hands itched just walking into the multi-purpose room. He was already there across the table from Mrs. Dalton, leaning back, sipping coffee like he owned the place. I didn't know exactly what I was going to say when my moment came, only that I wouldn't leave this room without reading the truth into the air, no matter how much he scowled. Shall I write the next chapter? When Mrs. Dalton wrapped up the budget items and opened the floor for community notes, I felt my legs move before my brain caught up. Chairs scraped slightly as people turned to look. I could hear the rustle of jackets, the slosh of coffee in paper cups. "I have something to bring up," I said, my voice louder than I expected. "It concerns the ethics of donations and scholarships connected to this PTA." Across the room, his eyes narrowed just a fraction, like a cat catching movement it doesn't like. I took a breath and held up the printed photo. "This is an email from Peterson Investment Services confirming a $24,000 transfer from a custodial educational account, one where I am the named beneficiary, into the Carter Family Scholarship Fund. That transfer occurred last month. I was never informed, and I never consented. But 2 weeks later, that exact amount was presented publicly here, to a different student. A murmur rippled across the tables. Someone at the far end leaned in to whisper to their neighbor. Mrs. Dalton's eyes darted between me and him, clearly unsure how to intervene. He didn't stay seated long. He rose slowly, placing his coffee cup down like it was made of glass. "Let me clear this up," he said. "The account in question was under my custodial management. I have a responsibility to invest in the student most likely to use it to its fullest. It's not about favoritism. It's about potential return. My decision stands." The cool arrogance in his tone lit something in me. "You mean," I said, steady, "you decided your stepdaughter deserved the funds you'd promised me for years, promised in front of my mother because you liked her odds better?" People were watching him now, not me. One father, a lawyer I recognized, tilted his head, the way people do when they realize a line's been crossed. "I made the responsible choice," he insisted, but his voice had picked up speed, a faint edge of defensiveness. In that moment, I could see it cracking. Not just his image as a generous benefactor, but the easy narrative he'd built. And I knew this room wouldn't forget the way his justification landed. What I didn't know was how fast word would travel beyond these walls, and what it would cost both of us once it did. Shall I write the next chapter? By the following afternoon, I realized just how small our town really was. During lunch period, a friend slid into the seat across from me, eyebrows up. "It's all over the parents' Facebook group," she whispered. "Screenshots and everything." I hadn't even posted the photo. Someone at the PTA meeting must have taken quick snaps of my printout when I passed it around. By dinner, my inbox and DMs were crammed with half a dozen parents asking if the rumors were true, and one message from that lawyer dad. "If you want to talk about your rights in this matter, call me." Mom, however, was pale and shaky when I got home. "He called me," she said without preamble. "He's furious. Said you humiliated him in front of the whole community, and he's freezing the rest of the account until legal ownership is clarified." My stomach clenched. That meant even the scraps I might have salvaged were on lock. It was retaliation, pure and simple. And yet, the part of me that had stood in that PTA room and watched him squirm refused to regret it. "The lawyer from the meeting reached out," I said carefully. "He says I might have a case." Mom looked torn, eyes darting toward the floor. "Fighting him will get ugly. He has resources. And Emily's mother. She's not exactly quiet either." "I'm already paying the price," I told her. "The only difference is whether I also stay silent." The next week was a blur of whispered texts from cousins, cold stares in the grocery store from his circle of friends, and more messages from parents offering bits of information about his donations to other students in years past. A pattern was emerging, and not one that would make him look better in court. Still, the legal path meant months, maybe years, of stress, and college deadlines were weeks away. I had to decide, fast, if the fight was worth waging now, or if I should focus on salvaging any sliver of my education plans first. Shall I write the next chapter? That night, I sat on my bed with my laptop open to my top choice university's payment portal, the tuition deposit due banner glowing in unforgiving red. The number wasn't enormous compared to the fund he'd gutted, but it was still impossible for me in cash. My part-time coffee shop gig barely covered gas and my phone bill. I kept circling the same exhausting questions. If I launched into a legal battle now, what would it cost me in both time and focus? And if I stepped back temporarily to piece together loans and emergency scholarships, would I ever get the chance, or the energy, to hold him accountable? At some point past midnight, I realized the choice wasn't between fighting or surviving. It was about which came first. So I started drafting emails to every scholarship coordinator I could find, attaching the proof I had as context for financial aid. The responses came slowly at first. A polite acknowledgement here, a request for more information there. But by the week's end, 2 local organizations had fast-tracked small awards for me. It wasn't much, but it was enough to cover the deposit and keep my enrollment alive. Meanwhile, the lawyer dad from PTA had looped me in with a contact who specialized in custodial account disputes. We had a call that Saturday, and she didn't mince words. On paper, he might have been able to justify reallocating the funds, but the public statements and the explicit past promises give us leverage, especially since the beneficiary is unrelated and you're of age. In other words, there was a path, even if it was narrow and uphill. I hung up feeling something I hadn't felt in weeks, control creeping back into my fingers. The next step would be formal. Demand letters, filings, the kind of paper trail that can't be brushed off with a smirk. But part of me wondered if he'd fold before it got that far, just to stop the slow leak of his generous benefactor image. I didn't have to wonder for long, because the very next email in my inbox was from him. Shall I write the next chapter?